The war hall of the Varkesh Empire was alive with the deep hum of alien voices. Giant banners hung from the black steel walls, each one marked with symbols of past conquests. Planets taken, fleets destroyed, enemies crushed. The air smelled faintly of metal, and the strange incense burned after every victory. Rows of new recruits sat at long, curved tables. Their armored forms gleamed under the cold blue lights, their sharp eyes and tooth-lined jaws flashing as they laughed. These were the warriors of the Varkesh, proud, brutal, and feared across the galaxy. Training had ended for the day, and the young soldiers were telling stories to impress each other. One recruit leaned forward, his scaled hands tapping the table for attention. "Do you know the one about the humans?" he asked with a grin. "They once sent an army to fight the Zarak horde, armed with sticks and old guns. They say their leader wore bright colors so the enemy could see him better." The table erupted in laughter. Another recruit added, "I heard they believe in invisible powers that protect them, and they think they can win wars by, what do they call it? Bravery." The laughter grew louder. Some pounded their fists against the table. Others mimicked human walking, making themselves look weak and clumsy. "Humans," one spat, "soft-skinned and slow. Why do they even bother fighting? They always lose." That last question seemed to hang in the air. The sound of laughter began to fade, not because anyone disagreed, but because they had noticed something. At the far end of the war hall, in the shadows near the largest banner, a figure had risen to his feet. He was taller than the rest, his armor dark and battered from years of war. Scars ran across his face, down his neck and onto his arms. One of his eyes was pale and milky, the mark of a wound that should have killed him, but hadn't. He carried himself with the stillness of a predator who had no need to prove himself. This was Commander Korath, the Varkesh war hero whose name alone could silence a room. He stepped forward slowly, his heavy boots making the floor plates groan. The recruits straightened in their seats. Some looked away, others held their breath. Korath rarely spoke to new warriors, and when he did, it was never without reason. His gaze swept across the hall, moving from one young soldier to the next. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of years and battles. "You know nothing of humans." No one moved. No one dared to laugh now. Korath took another step forward. "You speak of them as if they are prey, as if they are weak, as if their legends are lies told to children." He paused, his single good eye narrowing. "But I have seen the truth." A flicker of curiosity passed through the recruits. They had heard stories of Korath's victories, battles where he had faced enemies no one else could defeat. But never had he spoken of humans. One recruit, younger and braver than the rest, raised his voice. "What truth, Commander? What could humans do against the Varkesh?" Korath's lips curled, but it was not a smile. "I will tell you," he said, his tone sharp as a blade. "And when I am done, you will never laugh at them again." The lights in the war hall seemed dimmer now, the air colder. The recruits leaned forward, unable to stop themselves. Korath's hand rested on the hilt of his ceremonial blade. "Years ago, before most of you were born, I fought against humans. I was there when the Varkesh believed them to be nothing. I was there when we thought they would fall within a week." He paused, his gaze distant for a moment, as if he could still see the battlefield in his mind. "We were wrong." A murmur ran through the recruits, but no one dared speak. Korath took another slow step forward, the sound of his boots echoing in the stillness. "You think you know war because you have fought those who fear you. But humans—" He shook his head. "Humans fight, even when they should not. They fight when they are beaten. They fight when they have nothing left to fight with. And when you think they are finished. His voice grew even quieter, forcing the recruits to strain to hear him. That is when they are most dangerous. The room was frozen now. Not a single plate of armor clinked. Korath looked over the young warriors once more, then turned and began walking toward the center of the hall. You wish to know about humans? Then listen, he said, his tone like a closing door. I will tell you what I saw. I will tell you how they fight. And I will tell you why they should never be underestimated. The recruits said nothing, but the hunger in their eyes was clear. The laughter was gone, replaced with something else, something that felt like the first taste of fear. And as Korath began his story, the war hall seemed smaller, darker, and far less certain. Korath stood in the center of the war hall, his gaze locked on the recruits. It was during the first human Varkesh War, he began. Our fleet had broken through every defense they had. My ship was sent to take a small human outpost, fewer than 50 soldiers guarding civilians. Their weapons were old, their walls weak. It was supposed to be easy. He paced slowly. We landed at dawn. Frost covered the ground. They could see our ships, yet they stood waiting for us. They lined the walls with rifles, pistols, knives, even farming tools. A few recruits smirked. Korath's eye hardened, and the smirks vanished. They opened fire as we advanced. Their bullets could not pierce our armor, but they aimed for the joints, the gaps. I saw one man take a shot to the chest, fall, then shout for another to take his place. That soldier stepped over his body and kept firing. Korath's voice deepened. When their rifles emptied, they used pistols. When pistols ran dry, they used knives. When they had nothing left, they fought with their hands. I saw one throw himself in front of another to block a shot. I saw a wounded man drag his comrade to safety while firing blind with the other hand. He paused, letting the image sink in. Not one ran. Not one begged. They fought like they had already accepted death, and decided they would take as many of us with them as they could. Korath's gaze drifted for a moment, as if seeing the frost-covered battlefield again. We lost warriors that day, not because they had better weapons, but because they would not break. Every step forward cost us blood. He stepped closer to the recruits. You think bravery is weakness. You think sacrifice is foolish. But to humans, the life of a comrade is worth more than their own. The hall was silent. The recruits no longer looked so certain. In the end, we took the outpost. The civilians were captured. Urid. The soldiers all dead. But they died on their feet, facing us. That was my first battle against humans, Korath said, his tone heavy. And it would not be my last. He stepped back into the shadows, leaving the young warriors leaning forward, waiting for the rest. Korath's voice grew quieter, drawing the recruits in closer. A few cycles later, I faced them again. This time there were even fewer, only 20 human soldiers, protecting a group of civilians trying to evacuate. They had a single transport ship. If we broke through, none would escape. He paused, his gaze fixed on some point far away in memory. We outnumbered them 5-1. Our weapons were stronger, our armor thicker. Victory should have been certain. The recruits waited for him to say it had been quick, but Korath's tone told them otherwise. We advanced, and they pushed us back. We came again, and they held the line. Every time we thought they were finished, they found the strength to stand again. It was not rage that drove them. It was something colder, something sharper. He paced slowly, the sound of his boots echoing. In the middle of that fight, I noticed something strange. They would shout to each other, laugh even, as if we weren't moments from killing them. One joked about owing another a drink if they both survived. Another called out a bet on who would drop more Varkesh before the day was over. Korath shook his head slightly. It was not arrogance. It was their way of holding on. A way to keep fear from taking them. Even as the dead fell around them, they smiled. Some of the younger recruits looked puzzled, others uneasy. The idea of joking in the middle of battle was alien to them, almost madness. My squad began to feel it, Korath continued. At first it was annoyance, then confusion, and then unease. These were not the cowardly prey we had been told about. They were something else, something we did not understand. He stepped closer, his scarred face lit by the hall's cold light. We lost warriors that day. The humans lost more, but they never stopped fighting, even as their transport filled and the last civilians boarded, too. Hay stayed behind to hold us back. Korath's voice hardened. They fought not for themselves, but for those who could not fight. That is why they smiled. That is why they stood. And that, he said, letting his words hang in the silent hall, is why I stopped underestimating them. He let the silence linger. The recruits' eyes were locked on him now, their earlier arrogance gone. Without another word, Korath straightened and stepped back, the shadows swallowing him again. His story was far from over, and every one of them knew it. Korath's voice was low now, carrying the weight of memory. The battle dragged on until the humans had nothing left to fire. Their rifles were empty, their sidearms useless. But they did not stop. They drew knives, axes, even broken pieces of metal, and charged. He looked across the recruits, his single eye cold. Understand this. They charged us. 20 against a force 5 times their size, with no chance of survival. They did it anyway. The recruits sat still, their faces tight. We cut them down, one by one. Yet every moment they bought meant more civilians escaped. I saw one soldier, already bleeding badly, tackle one of my warriors so the others could get through. He knew it would kill him. He did it anyway. Korath's tone slowed. Then I saw him, their commander. His chest armor was shattered, blood pouring from a wound that no medic could fix. But he refused treatment. Instead, he ordered the last of his soldiers to fall back to the ship. He stayed behind to face us alone. Korath's steps were measured as he spoke, the sound echoing in the silent hall. My orders were clear. Finish him. End the fight. Yet when I raised my blade, I hesitated. He paused, and the recruits leaned forward slightly. His eyes were fixed on me. There was no fear in them, only defiance. I had seen warriors fight for pride, for empire, for glory. But this was different. He was not fighting for himself. He was fighting so that others could live. And I respected that. For a moment, Korath's voice grew quieter, almost thoughtful. I lowered my blade slightly, just enough to speak. I asked him why. Why throw his life away for people who could not fight? The recruits held their breath. Korath's tone deepened. He smiled, even then, as blood filled his lungs. And he said— The hall was silent as Korath spoke the words slowly, each one carrying the weight of the mom. And tell them, we are more than they think. Korath's gaze swept across the room. Then he fell. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel like a victor. The room remained still. The young warriors no longer looked like they were listening to a story. They looked like they were trying to understand a truth they had never considered. Korath stepped back into the shadows again. That day changed me, he said simply, and it should change you. Korath let the hall stay silent for a long moment before speaking again. We won that battle, he said, his tone flat. But it was not the victory we expected. More than half my squad was dead or too wounded to fight again. 20 humans had held us back long enough for every civilian to escape. 20. The recruits shifted uneasily. "I kept thinking about that commander's words," Korath continued. "We are more than they think. I had believed humans were weak because they were smaller, softer, slower. But if they could fight that hard while outnumbered and outgunned, what would they be capable of if they had the same strength, the same weapons, the same numbers?" His good eye narrowed. The thought bothered me, so I began to study them. Korath moved slowly as he spoke, pacing across the war hall like a teacher among students. "I read their histories. I learned of the Spartans, a small force who fought a giant army until their last breath. I read of their wars in the 20th century, where soldiers crossed oceans to fight for lands not their own. I learned of disaster survivors who endured fire, flood, famine, and kept going." He paused, letting the recruits imagine it. "Every record told me the same thing. Humans are built for endurance. Their bodies heal quickly. They can adapt to almost any world. But it is their minds that make them dangerous. When they are pushed to the edge, they do not surrender. They become harder, stronger, more determined." Korath's voice deepened. "I have fought many species. Most break when they are losing. Humans change. You can beat them down 100 times, and they will still rise the 101st. The recruits sat straighter now, listening with full attention. The arrogance in their eyes had faded, replaced by a quiet respect, or perhaps something close to fear. Korath stopped pacing and faced them. "This is why I tell you their myths are not lies. Their legends are not just stories. They are warnings, written in the blood of those who underestimated them." He stepped back into the shadowed end of the hall, his voice fading but firm. "Remember this. You may one day face a human in battle. If you do, pray they are not fighting for something they love. Because then—" He let the sentence hang, the meaning clear without finishing it. The hall stayed silent. None of the recruits dared speak. The image of humans refusing to fall, even when the odds were hopeless, was now burned into their minds. Korath's gaze swept over the young recruits. No one dared meet his eye. The earlier smirks, the casual arrogance, were gone. "There is one thing you must understand," he said at last, his voice low but sharp. "Humans have a willpower unlike any other species I have met. Push them to the edge and they will not break. They will grow stronger. Press them harder and they will fight harder. Try to crush them and they will rise from the dust with fire in their eyes." He let the words sink in before continuing. "I have seen warriors stand their ground until they were buried in it. I have seen them laugh with blood in their mouths, not because they were unafraid, but because they refused to give fear to their enemy. This is their true weapon. Not their ships, not their guns, their will." The recruits shifted uneasily, glancing at each other, but finding no comfort there. Korath's voice hardened. "Mocking humans is the first mistake you can make. The moment you think they are soft or weak, you open the door to defeat. And when you underestimate them, you will not see the end coming until it is already here." He took a slow step forward, his heavy boots echoing in the hall. "Many before you laughed at humans. Many thought them too small, too fragile, too emotional to matter in war. Those same warriors now lie in graves. Graves dug by human hands." The silence in the hall deepened. Korath stopped in the center, the dim light casting shadows across the scars on his face. "I tell you this not to scare you, but to prepare you. If you ever meet a human on the field, and you see them stand when they should fall, you are already in danger." For a moment, he said nothing more. The recruits sat frozen, their expressions grim. Every trace of smugness had been burned away, replaced by the heavy weight of understanding. Korath gave a final nod. Remember this lesson. It mattered. He saved your life. The hall remained still, filled only with the quiet hum of the distant war machines. Korath stood in the center of the hall, letting the silence stretch until it felt heavy enough to press on every chest. The recruits waited, their eyes locked on him, sensing that his final words would be the most important. Slowly he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, almost dangerous tone. Pray you never face humans in a war they believe in, because then you will lose. The words seemed to echo in the still air. No one moved. No one spoke. For a heartbeat, the recruits stared back at him, their minds working through the weight of the warning. Some glanced at the floor, others looked at each other, but none dared to break the silence. The earlier pride in their eyes was gone, replaced by something colder. The slow burn of respect mixed with unease. Korath straightened, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. Class dismissed. Chairs scraped against the floor as the recruits rose, but the usual chatter was absent. They filed out quietly, each lost in thought. The lesson they had expected to be about tactics had instead been about survival, and the nature of an enemy they had mocked moments ago. From the back of the hall, the faint hum of the warship's engines was the only sound. Outside, the stars stretched endless and cold, as if the universe itself was listening. The camera, or the mind's eye of the listener, began to drift away from the scene. The recruits walked down the long steel corridors, their boots striking in unison but without rhythm, their expressions troubled. Somewhere in their minds, they pictured the kind of humans Korath had spoken of, soldiers who laughed in the face of death, who fought harder the closer they came to defeat. And for the first time, the recruits wondered if the Varkesh Empire's war against Earth would truly end in victory. The image pulled farther back, through the hull of the ship, into the black sea of space. The alien vessel drifted onward, a silent predator among the stars. But now even the predators had doubts. Far away, on a small blue planet, humans went about their lives, unaware of the story just told in a warship's hall, unaware of the fear they had planted in alien hearts. What future battles would come, no one knew. But somewhere, the thought lingered. If the humans ever fought for something they truly believed in, the galaxy would never be the same.